PTE Help. Test 4. Listening Module. Fill in the blanks. Item number 1.
We're going to fly into my colleague Peter's brain. We're going to do it non-invasively using MRI. We don't have to inject anything. We don't need radiation. We will be able to fly into the anatomy of Peter's brain, literally fly into his body, but more importantly, we can look at his mind. When Peter moves his arm, that yellow spot you see there is the interface to the functioning of Peter's mind taking place. Now, you've seen before that with electrodes you can control robotic arms, that brain imaging and scanners can show you the insides of brains. What's new is that that process has typically taken days or months of analysis. We've collapsed that through technology to milliseconds, and that allows us to let Peter look at his brain in real time as he's inside the scanner. He can look at these 65,000 points of activation per second. If he can see this pattern in his own brain, he can learn how to control it.
PTE Help. Test 4. Listening Module. Fill in the blanks. Item number 2.
I think there are some very important problems that don't get worked on naturally. That is, the market does not drive the scientists, the communicators, the thinkers, the governments to do the right things. And only by paying attention to these things and having brilliant people who care and draw other people in can we make as much progress as we need to. So this morning I'm going to share 2 of these problems and talk about where they stand. But before I dive into those, I want to admit that I am an optimist. Any tough problem, I think it can be solved. And part of the reason I feel that way is looking at the past. Over the last century, average lifespan has more than doubled. Another statistic, perhaps my favorite, is to look at childhood deaths. As recently as 1960, 110 million children were born, and 20 million of those died before the age of 5. 5 years ago, 135 million children were born, so more, and less than 10 million of them died before the age of 5. So that's a factor of 2 reduction in the childhood death rate. It's a phenomenal thing. I mean, each one of those lives matters a lot.
PTE Help. Test 4. Listening Module. Fill in the blanks. Item number 3.
There have been 3 ways to try to impact the brain: the therapist's couch, pills, and the knife. This is a 4th alternative that you are soon going to have. We all know that as we form thoughts, they form deep channels in our minds and in our brains. Chronic pain is an example. If you burn yourself, you pull your hand away. But if you're still in pain in 6 months or 6 years' time, it's because these circuits are producing pain that's no longer helping you. If we can look at the activation in the brain that's producing the pain, we can form 3D models and watch in real time the brain process information, and then we can select the areas that produce the pain. So put your arms back up and flex your bicep. Now imagine that you will soon be able to look inside your brain and select brain areas to do that same thing. What you're seeing here is we've selected the pathways in the brain of a chronic pain patient. This may shock you, but we're literally reading this person's brain in real time. They're watching their own brain activation, and they're controlling the pathway that produces their pain. They are learning to flex this system that releases their own endogenous opiates. As they do it, in the upper left is a display that's yoked to their brain activation of their own pain being controlled. When they control their brain, they can control their pain. This is an investigational technology, but in clinical trials, we're seeing a 44 to 64% decrease in chronic pain patients.
PTE Help. Test 4. Listening module. Fill in the blanks. Item number 4.
Well, what's the history of this disease? It's been a severe disease for thousands of years. In fact, if we look at the genetic code, it's the only disease we can see that people who lived in Africa actually evolved several things to avoid malarial deaths. Deaths actually peaked at a bit over 5 million in the 1930s. So it was absolutely gigantic. And the disease was all over the world. Terrible disease. It was in the United States. It was in Europe. People didn't know what caused it until the early 1900s when a British military man figured out that it was mosquitoes. So it was everywhere. And two tools helped bring the death rate down. One was killing the mosquitoes with DDT, and the other was treating the patients with quinine or quinine derivatives. And so that's why the death rate did come down. Now, ironically, what happened was it was eliminated from all the temperate zones, which is where all the rich countries are. So we can see 1900, it's everywhere. 1945, it's still most places. 1970, the US and most of Europe have gotten rid of it. 1990, you've gotten most of the northern areas. And then more recently, you can see it's just around the equator. And so this leads to the paradox that because the disease is only in the poor countries, it doesn't get much investment.